Hello, I'm Lucy Johnson, Executive Director of Transitions Life Center and Community, a special place for special needs located in Ocala, Florida. Today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing to you a dear friend and an almost lifelong friend of mine, author Sam Farmer, as he presents Autism in the Workplace. Sam has a unique perspective on this topic as he himself was diagnosed with Asperger syndrome at 40 years old. Having had this later in life diagnosis really gave him a lifetime of experiences to reflect upon and understand how it shaped who he became as an adult and an individual. He understood how it affected many relationships in his life, many experiences he had, and he learned how much the support and love of his mom and dad really meant to him during this time. Sam has chosen to embrace the topic and to share with the rest of the world his experiences by authoring A Long Walk Down a Winding Road. Tonight, he's going to share with us his experience in the workplace, some tips, some strategies, a few challenges that he's met, but why it's so important for neurodiversity in our workforce. I hope you'll enjoy the presentation. If you'll please excuse my inability to hit record before we started our program, we'll jump right in with author Sam Farmer.
Kind of did away with that diagnosis. And long story short, the book that I wrote, A Long Walk Down a Winding Road, resulted from basically knowing that I had Asperger's and figuring that mostly to honor my parents' memory, to thank them for all that they gave me, that I wrote this book to kind of give back to other people. My mother passed away in 1996, my father a year later, or rather 2016. My father a year later in 2017. And so rather than pay them back for all that they had done to help me to be happy and to succeed in spite of all the challenges and adversity that you can face being on the spectrum, I decided to pay it forward in their memory, where I could no longer pay them back after they were deceased. And the book and a bunch of articles and a whole bunch of conference presentations like this one, they all come together to kind of form what I call my paying it forward mission, where like they did as a marital and family therapist, that's what my mother did. My father was a doctor. Those are two professions where the number of people who they helped through their work really was immeasurable. I figured I would honor their legacy by helping people, not in the way that they did, but in my own way, which I discovered could best be done through my writing and through presentations like these. I am going to go now, Lucy, to the slideshow. Here we go. So I'm here to talk about autism in the workplace, but first I thought I would talk just a little bit about the book. It's kind of a memoir and a self-help book rolled into one. First and foremost, I want it to be a self-help book because the main crux of why I wrote it was so that people could hopefully use the book as a means of hopefully carving out a better life for themselves. Just like any self-help book strives to do. The memoir content is there to kind of give context to the self-help content in terms of giving the reader an idea of how I lived my life and what I went through that led to my acquisition of these ideas and insights that I picked up through life. that I share with the reader, with the hope that they'll see value in these ideas. And everybody likes a good story, and there are a good number of them in this book, from my childhood through college, really up until just a few years ago. And so it's memoir and self-help rolled into one book. My hope is that greater happiness and success in life can be acquired by those reading the book, despite whatever challenges and adversity we may face. And I'm careful in the book to only write about those areas that my experience suggests that I can write decently about. I'm very careful not to delve into areas that I don't feel qualified to speak to. And so the ones that you see on the bottom bullet point on this slide really cover the crux of what I faced growing up, what I lived through, and therefore what I felt qualified to speak to in the book. Developing social skills and social competence, rising above bullying, perhaps most importantly, how to learn to love yourself, which can be thought of kind of as the process of building self-esteem. Workplace success, which is the chapter in the book that this presentation tonight predictably primarily draws on. And then what I call marriaging and parenting, where in my marriage, I'm married to a non-autistic woman. I'm autistic. The challenges in what's called a neurodiverse marriage, like the one I have, are very novel and very unique. And I also learned a lot about parenting, not just with respect to being a parent to my son, who's now 13 years old, but I also picked up on my parents' parenting style growing up, having been parented by them. So a lot about parenting in the book as well, and a whole lot more. But that's basically the crux of what A Long Walk Down a Winding Road is about. Lucy was very kind to be an advanced reader of the book. And if you look at the book, a very, very nice review of it that she gave is printed on the back cover. So she was a part of this process, which meant a great deal to me that an old high school friend could be a part of that project. Meant a great deal to me. Thank you again, Lucy, for those efforts. So now to the crux of what tonight's topic is about. This is a complicated area. I'm going to touch on what I feel are several key points. There is admittedly a lot more in the workplace success chapter in the book than what I have time to speak to tonight. And note that I am not a professional therapist of any kind or a workplace type advisor or counselor, or that I have a degree in this sort of stuff. What I'm talking about tonight and what I talk about in the book with respect to the workplace really comes purely from experience of being autistic, walking in these shoes, what I dealt with, what I learned. No specialties or degrees here. So just bear that in mind as I talk through these. Maybe one of the most important points here entering the workforce is this notion of the influence that the people you work with will have on you. If they're really good, kind, smart, decent people, wonderful things can happen. And if they're not so good, or if they're shady, that can have a very adverse effect. The people you work with have a direct effect on your success or otherwise in the workplace. I'll give you a prime example. Before I came into the job that I've had for almost 25 years now, I worked for a sales company managed by a man who often lied through his teeth. He told us that colleagues of ours who actually left the company, resigned, he would tell us that, oh, they just went on vacation. A newsletter would come out every week showing the top performers in the company in terms of sales. And for reasons that I didn't understand, my name was part of that list. And I'm like, I didn't sell this well. What am I doing on this list? And I asked a colleague, and she said, oh, well, Sam, you were added onto this list just to kind of make you feel good. Not necessarily because of your sales volume. So you're on this list, having not really earned the position that I had on the list of top sellers for the week. I kind of knew then in my gut that, you know, something is amiss with this workplace where half-truths are told, lies are told to try to keep people on board, but people are coming in and out through a revolving door. Credit is being awarded where it isn't due. It amazes me that I lasted 4 weeks, not 4 weeks, 4 months on that job. 4 months. In retrospect, I don't know how I even lasted that long. I guess I'm a glutton for punishment in that regard. But I'll spare you the other things that I saw going on. With lies and half-truths being endorsed, and other things of that sort, you'll know intuitively this is not a workplace that really long-term, I believe you'd be able to be a part of. Another job that I had, I was on for about a month. This was a good job with good people, but after a month's time, the manager told me that he could no longer afford to keep me on the payroll. This was another job in sales. I did not take that layoff personally. I didn't let it affect my sense of self. My boss told me I did a perfectly good job. I wasn't being let go for being an underperformer. So that's an important point. You never want to let a layoff or a rejection adversely affect your sense of self. None of us, even the smartest and most capable of us, are going to be a fit for every workplace out there. You win some, you lose some. In terms of what we say, what we do, we will be able to satisfy some people, other people not so much. Whether we're laid off or whether we interview and are rejected, do not let it get under your skin if you can. Don't take it personally. It's nothing that's wrong with you. It's just, it ended up just not being a fit. or circumstances beyond your control, as was the case with this other job. Another very, very important point, understanding your strengths and your weaknesses. The reason why this is very, very important in terms of kind of doing a self-assessment, of being honest with yourself of what you're good at, what you're not good at, is that many of us on the autism spectrum are going to want to be honest with our colleagues about what we're good at and not so good at, so that they're aware of these things and so that you can find ways to compensate. I have a very difficult time digesting information that is spoken to me verbally. I would go into many meetings and I would walk out feeling as though, you know, so much was said, but how much did I really learn in this meeting? That one thing that I was able to figure out to compensate was that I would email the people who I meant to learn a lot about their projects, being an IT consultant. And I would say in that email, you know, I just thought I would verify a couple of things that I thought I heard you say in writing, so that I have a written record of what it is that your project requires. And I would email clients questionnaires. I would ask them questions, they would answer those questions, and their answers would provide the information that I would need to do my job, which is the design of solutions with information technology to sell to all kinds of customers: government, education, medical, commercial, small, medium, large business, you name it. And that was a good way for me to compensate for my weaknesses, really an auditory perception, which happens to be what my learning disability is. It's a common, I hate the word, but it's often used, it's the word comorbidity, that often with autism, you have other challenges that accompany it. For me, that comorbidity is the learning disability that I would admit, you know, to my colleagues. This is something I'm not so good at. This is a way that I've been able to compensate that's worked. Just to give an example, that if you don't know what your weaknesses are, if you're not honest about your weaknesses, how are you going to compensate for those weaknesses in terms of being successful in the workplace? Not to mention that you want your colleagues to be aware of what you're good at, so that they're able to leverage their relationship with you in a way that hones in on what you're good at. You'd rather have coworkers leverage your strengths to lead to success, rather than to expect things that are relevant to your weaknesses and maybe see those expectations fall short as a result. You can't educate them about what you're good and not so good at if you yourself are not aware of what you're good and not so good at. I have found that honesty is the best policy. Easier said than done in terms of revealing your diagnosis. I think maybe this is easier to do now than it was years ago, in terms of, again, just being honest with the person interviewing you, being honest with your coworkers, as I have been, that look, I'm autistic. There are things that I'm really, really good at. other things that I struggle with. You want to be careful about this because you want to have that feeling that the people you're working with are the type of people who will listen to you, who will understand where you're coming from, who rather than would cut you down because of your diagnosis, would instead admire you for your courage in revealing your diagnosis. Again, the importance of the people around you, the people you work with, could either make you or break you. You want to try to get a sense, to the extent that you can, of would people be receptive of my diagnosis, or would they not be? If the latter holds true, you may very well find that this is a job that long term you'd have a very difficult time succeeding in, being happy in. Maybe it's not the right job to have. And maybe you can get a read on that in the interview by trying to get a sense of the personality of the person interviewing you, of does this person seem like a good listener? Is he or she understanding and accommodating? Or is this the type of person who may try politically to cut me down because of my diagnosis? That sort of thing. Again, easier said than done to try to perceive the personalities of the people around you, but nonetheless, a very important thing to try to do as best you can. I was very, very fortunate in the jobs, most of them that I've had. They've been with good, decent people who only saw me for my strengths, my weaknesses, that once they knew me well enough, it didn't really matter much if I told them that I was autistic or not, because with or without the diagnosis, it's still me. It's still Sam Farmer. I am who I am, whether I have the diagnosis or whether I don't. So maybe that's another guideline, is that if you're going to reveal your diagnosis, maybe you give it some time after you've been with the company a little while. People know you. Maybe they're more likely to be receptive of your diagnosis than otherwise after you let a little time go by. And when you first join the company, you begin the work of trying to get a sense, again, of the personalities of your coworkers. Back to that point of, very important that you find yourself in an employment situation that involves good, intelligent, understanding people. There are those workplaces, and then there are other workplaces that are toxic. And obviously you want to try to avoid the toxic ones and continue to look for that right workplace situation. Might take time, might take a while. Sometimes things don't work out overnight. They take a little patience. I went through, the myriad of very short-lived, useless, dead-end jobs, some of which I write about in the book. But eventually that led to the job that I've had now for almost 25 years. Realistic expectations, very, very important. Important that you have the right expectations of yourself and that you have the right expectations of other people. If you expect too much of yourself or of your coworkers, you're setting yourself up to be let down. Could get into some trouble there. I write a lot about that in the book, really in connection with self-esteem building, that you really need to have realistic expectations of yourself and others so that you're not setting yourself up to be let down. Very true in the workplace, as well as true with self-esteem building. If you expect too much from your colleagues, they might eventually come to resent that about you. They might think that you're not trying to carry your weight in a team effort or in the tasks that you handle. Bring your expectations down to earth. Not everybody is going to be as accommodating towards you as you might want them to be. So, people are judgmental. People won't always be able to give you the attention that you think you deserve or that you might expect. All those kinds of things that play into expectations. When you're new to the job, admit it. Very important to do. If you admit up front that, hey, I'm new to the job, if I'm a little bit rusty in doing this task or that, or if you find that I'm asking too many questions to kind of try to learn the lay of the land, people will understand that as long as you admit, look, I'm new to the job. I'm going to need a little bit of time to kind of get up to speed. And again, this thing about expectations. By admitting you're new, you allow your coworkers to adopt realistic expectations of you, which early on, admittedly, you're going to likely need a good amount of leeway. So admit it when you're the new kid on the block. Be social, be likable. Little things go a long way here. If you hear somebody sneeze, say bless you. If somebody is walking behind you and you're about to walk out the door, hold the door open for them and let them walk out first before you do. Same thing with the door to an elevator. If you're walking down the hallway and you see that somebody is getting frustrated, maybe they're having a difficult time in the workplace with something, maybe they're in a not so good mood, whatever it is they're struggling with, reach out and say, do you want to talk through it? Is there anything that I can do to help you? Try to be cognizant of the needs of the people in the workplace who surround you. That being one of many examples of how you can do that. There's this concept I learned while working with a speech language pathologist. It's this concept of personal folders. Keep a folder in your brain that includes knowledge of who your coworkers are, what they do. Try to keep track of those coworkers who have kids. A coworker would absolutely love for you to show interest in their kids, that when you walk in the morning, say, well, how are your kids doing? Are they on vacation? What are their plans for vacation? Engage coworkers in conversations based on your knowledge of them that you keep in this kind of virtual personal folder in your head. Personal folder is a concrete concept that you can apply to something in your brain that you keep track of in terms of understanding who your coworkers are and using that understanding to strike up conversations that indicate that you're showing an interest in their lives. Be social, be likable. Using methods for alleviating stress. What works best for me, but may or may not work best for other people. If I feel that I'm really tensing up because I'm really stressed, one example that works great for me every time, just stop for a second, breathe in, breathe out, deep breaths. And that when you're breathing out, imagine that all the stress that is in your body is leaving your body as you breathe out. Great coping mechanism for alleviating stress, really in any situation, but certainly in the workplace. Get up from your desk and take breaks, take a walk. Either take a walk in the workplace, or on your lunch break, if the weather is nice, take a walk outside, clear your mind. Another great way to alleviate stress. Things of that sort, just to kind of give two examples. Many other things that can be done to alleviate stress. If you are walking around in your workplace, just kind of say hi to people, check in with your coworkers, just say hi, how are you? How are things? What project are you working on? It's a good opportunity, unless your colleague is buried in their work, you don't want to interrupt them if you see that they're buried in their work. But if they're not, and if their head is up and they seem to not be buried, they would likely pay attention to you and not be disrupted by you asking them, so how are you? How are the kids? Again, the personal folder concept of making it a point to learn what you can about your colleagues and using what you learn as a basis for how you talk to them. That's another great way to alleviate stress, is to just say little things to your colleagues, to acknowledge their presence, to show them that they're not invisible to you. They'll appreciate that. And a bunch of other examples I don't have time to get into right now that are in the book of being social, being likable, what to do, what not to do when you're new to the job, tips on how to be a good team player, where more often in the workplace you'd be part of a team. And that's another point that I'll make that's not on this slide. There are a lot of people on the autism spectrum who work best on an individual basis rather than in a team basis. Again, this is part of knowing your strengths and weaknesses. If you communicate that to your manager, to your boss, of how you can most effectively contribute to a workplace success, be honest. Educate your management of how you work best. And you might just want to say to the manager, look, my personality, being on the spectrum, I tend to work more effectively if I'm tackling tasks on my own rather than in a coordinated team effort. Understanding those kinds of things so that you can set the right expectations with your boss, your management, to ensure success, not just for you, but for the success of the workplace. Successful workplaces bring out the best in the people who are there. Successful workplaces really hone in on people's strengths rather than their weaknesses. Any manager or boss in his or her right mind would want to be leveraging the strengths of the people working for him or her, because that's the way you get really good results. So be honest about those with your management, with your colleagues. They'll be happier with you, you'll be happier. There'll be a greater likelihood of success in the workplace if you communicate, if you educate on these things. And to not be afraid to say, look, for certain things, I work better alone. I can work on something, get it done, report back to you, report back to my coworkers, and they can use what I've done to do what they need to do, so on and so forth. Understanding your strengths and weaknesses is very important, going back to that point. So neurodiversity in the workplace. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the term, neurodiversity can mean many different things. People who are autistic, people who have ADHD, people with dyslexia, dysgraphia, perhaps a couple of other diagnoses. All of us are often referred to as neurodiverse individuals. Our brains are wired differently than people who are what is often referred to as neurotypical. The concept of neurodiversity here is this notion that if you have a diversified workforce, not just with respect, say, to ethnicity or race, gender, all the different categories in the population of what is diverse in the world, that you add neurology to that list. Sexual orientation, gender identity. And it's this notion that neurodiversity is just another element in the population of the diversity that exists in society, and that workplaces ideally would reflect this kind of diversity for reasons that are listed here. When you have autistic and non-autistic people working together, you get the benefit of having a diversity of perspectives on things, different ideas, different ways of looking at things, rather than just everybody thinking or saying the same thing. Ideally, the workplace that you're a part of would be representative of the diversity in society, certainly a good thing to have, versus just everybody being the same. And this notion that even though autistic people are different in ways than non-autistic people, doesn't mean that we need to be fixed, or that we need to be corrected or cured, or the whole gamut of what I consider to be very hurtful things. That, you know, for me, my autism is core to my identity. It's core to who I am as a person. It's the way my brain is wired. It plays into how I think about things. I don't need to be fixed. It's respecting the uniqueness of individuals who are different that plays into this concept of neurodiversity. And that we have a lot to contribute. Autism isn't entirely about challenges and adversity and hardship. Many autistic people, including me, exhibit a number of traits that would be enormously helpful to the workplace. I list just a few of them here. Outside the box, big picture thinking. I worked on a project several years ago for an Ivy League university. That university's library system was putting together an archive of testimonials of Holocaust survivors. Now, this wasn't an overly involved solution that was impressive in the sense of including all different kinds of technologies working together. We didn't necessarily make a whole lot of money on this project. A lot of people in a sales organization will equate success with how big the deal is and how much money did I make. But where I'm more of a big picture thinker, I think of that as perhaps the greatest achievement that I've had at my company of almost 25 years, not because of how much money I made, but because of what that technology would be put to use for. That it would store the testimonials of Holocaust survivors for future generations. Being Jewish myself, I take that very personally. I'm looking beyond what most people in sales consider success to be. I'm looking at the actual impact that the solutions I design have on the institution purchasing it, on society, etc. Just to give an example. Analytical skills, a very common ability among people on the spectrum. The ability to strongly focus on a task for long periods of time is another very common ability that many employers of autistic people tout, is how well somebody can focus on the task at hand. I researched Dell Technologies' autism hiring program for an article that I wrote for The Hill about a year or so ago. And in the midst of doing my research, I came across YouTube interviews of the managers of the autistic hirees and the autistic people themselves. And the managers were saying, my goodness, I can't believe the success we're having, how wonderful this workplace is, to have different perspectives, different opinions. You might want to tout that in a job interview, tout that to your management, that look, by virtue of my brain being wired a little bit differently and by being a neurodiverse individual, I'm bringing things to this organization that in all likelihood, by no fault of their own, my non-autistic colleagues may not bring. The autistic hirees at Dell Technologies were found to remain at the company for longer periods of time, lower turnover rates. And that managers could see that being a part of a workplace environment meant so much to these autistic people, being able to be part of a workplace where they feel they were contributing to something real, making a difference to an organization. Again, great self-esteem boosters. Had the diagnosis existed when he was alive, it's all but certain that Albert Einstein would have been diagnosed with Asperger's. It's been said that Andy Warhol would have been diagnosed had he been when he was alive. There's scholarship around Marilyn Monroe, around Abraham Lincoln, actors Dan Aykroyd, Daryl Hannah, David Byrne, if you're a child of the 80s, the lead singer of the Talking Heads. Those three performers are admittedly autistic. Jerry Seinfeld famously self-diagnosed himself being autistic. I think he ended up walking that back later, but nonetheless, initially he came out publicly and said, I'm autistic. I've got Asperger's. I admit it. I'm self-diagnosed. These are people, obviously, who had epic amounts of things to contribute to whatever environment they were in that led to them being the huge figures in culture that they have become. And imagine what they could give to a workplace. These are neurodiverse individuals. There's a lot to contribute, a lot of untapped potential that companies like Dell Technologies, a bunch of others, are only in recent years admitting that, look, we need to hire more of these people for all that they can bring that perhaps we've been missing out on. Say that. Again, the importance of being aware of your strengths and weaknesses, doing the self-assessment before you enter the workplace so that you can tout not just what maybe you have difficulty with, but what you're really good at, what you can contribute. And being communicative in educating the people in the workplace around you of what you're good at, not just what you may struggle with. So, for more information, there's my website, samfarmerauthor.com. I've got a bunch of articles, blog posts on this website. On the media section, that would be samfarmerauthor.com/media. All the articles that I've written for The Hill, for other media outlets, a bunch of coaching videos that I've done for the second organization, bullet point listed here, the Asperger Autism Network. I recorded a bunch of coaching videos on any number of topics. Again, with this paying it forward mission of just sharing ideas and insights on how people can do certain things well that I discovered I could do well, and sharing that knowledge. It's all there on samfarmerauthor.com, and there's a contact page, samfarmerauthor.com/contact, that if any of you want to get a hold of me for any reason, ask follow-up questions, make comments, etc., anything, you can reach out to me on the contact page on my website. It goes straight to my email. I promise I would get back to you. Sometimes it takes a little while, depending upon how busy I am when you reach out, but I always get back to people who reach out to me through my website's contact page. The book can be purchased off the website. There are buttons on the book section of the website that take you directly to my Amazon author page. Although Lucy, I believe that you have a way for this event of tracking book sales. I think you do.
Sorry, I was muted there. So if people would email me directly and let me know, or email Sam and let him know that you would like to purchase a book, The last time we did it, I did it through you. I took all of the orders and then I had sent them through you. So if you would like to purchase a book, you can email me and let me know, and I'd be more than happy to get a copy for you. Sam has graciously offered to donate some of the proceeds from those books to TLC, again, in an effort of paying it forward. He does a good job with that. We appreciate that. My email is Lucy, Lucy, at TLC-Ocala.org. But on the email where you registered, I don't remember if it came from Lucy or if it came from info. So if you just respond to that email, we'll respond to you as well.
And the importance here is that in reaching out to Lucy or to me, rather than going to Amazon, that way we can track sales. And I've told Lucy that for every book sold that we have knowledge of that you've ordered, that I will donate, I believe it's $5 per book sold to TLC. But the only way we can do that is if you email one of us in a way that enables us to track orders of books so that I then know how much to donate afterwards. For the future and after this event, or for other people who you might refer to this website, the book can be ordered via the website as well. You can join my mailing list through this website. There's a section where you can sign up to be included onto my mailing list, where when a new article of mine is published, I let people on my mailing list know. Resources like the Asperger Autism Network, the college internship program, others, the contact information for these organizations, what their missions are, all of that is on the website. And whenever I'm giving a presentation like this, all of my presentations, people on my mailing list find out about all of this. Now, the Asperger Autism Network is a great resource in terms of all of the support groups, all of the programs that they offer to people on the spectrum of all ages, grade school, adulthood, many great programs that they offer, one of which is called Life Map, where you can consult with specialists on like coming up with a long-term life plan that hones in on what you're good at, advice on college admissions, advice on the workplace. Life Map, the program kind of is what the word implies. All kinds of support groups for people of all ages, people on the spectrum, support groups for parents of people on the spectrum. Just go to aane.org and you'll see just all the myriad of support programs that this organization provides. I've been a member of this community for a number of years. Without my involvement, this book probably would never have been written. Great organization, great people. College internship program is a good one to know about. If you have a high school graduate who maybe doesn't quite feel prepared just yet to go to college or to enter the workforce, the college internship program offers programs to get these 17, 18-year-olds ready for the workforce, to prepare them for college, to prepare them to be successful in these settings. And they also focus on the development of building independent living skills among people on the spectrum of that age. So it's all about college prep, workplace prep, independent life skills. that they teach very, very effectively. I know these people well as well. Another good resource to be aware of for those kinds of things. And that pretty much covers it for what I thought I would talk about tonight.
Well, Sam, I do want to highlight, you talked about life maps and University of Florida CARD. That is something that they do as well. It has a slightly different name to it, but anybody who's participating with CARD would be able to learn about that as well. And it's a really, really important piece to figuring out exactly who you are and where you want to go, so that each individual has their own goals to set. I did want to open it up if there's anyone who'd like to ask a question. We do have one question in the chat, and it says, it's from Colette Corbin. Do you feel that you can determine if a workplace is toxic or healthy before accepting the job? Sometimes I have an uh-oh feeling, and I know that the job is not right for me at the interview stage, but I'm wondering if a person has to just try jobs at other times before they can determine if it's a fit for them.
I agree that often, as burdensome as it can be, that it can be a matter of trial and error in terms of being open to trying out jobs that might end up being dead ends, rather than go through a job that you find burdensome or that doesn't work out for you and then leaving and forgetting about it entirely. I write in the book about how the dead-end jobs ended up being valuable learning experiences to me of what I feel should be avoided. These jobs opened up my mind to what I should avoid. And lo and behold, eventually, with some time and patience, I ended up in the right job that I've been with for almost 25 years. Great people. The work is rewarding, but absolutely, it's often a question of trial and error. And maybe there are things about the company or about the people working there that can be researched ahead of time online. But my gut tells me is that you may not be able to find the kind of information you'd be looking for about that workplace environment by doing Google searches. That sometimes you kind of just have to jump in, get your feet wet, and it either works out or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, think about what you've learned about why it didn't work out so that you know what to avoid going forward, or that you know what to look for going forward. So yeah, trial and error is definitely relevant in that regard. And then references from people you know, from friends. Maybe a friend, as I once had, refers you to a job. Ask friends who may be knowledgeable about a particular company or workplace and say, look, knowing me the way you do you think I could be successful at this place? Or might it be a workplace where I'd crash and burn? Personal references, trial and error, whatever research you can do ahead of time. And it may take time and it may take patience, as it did for me.
Anybody else have any other questions right now?
Sarah, I think it might have been you who earlier asked the question about nonverbal communication. I think that was you, Sarah. Yes. With respect to that, at samfarmerauthor.com/resources, there is an organization in the community called Social Thinking. I did a good amount of work with the social thinking methodology as an adult in recent years. Prior to my work with them, I was mostly clueless about nonverbal communication, about being able to read body language. You can imagine the number that it did on me during my dating years before I met my wife. Looking back, I can't even remember if when I kissed my date, if I ever once did so with my eyes closed. I had a very rigid way of looking at what a kiss is. You don't kiss with your eyes, you kiss with your lips. So all I cared about really was what I was doing with my lips. And if my eyes are open or if they're closed, whatever. I thought kind of rigidly about that, where really there's a bigger context to things that I'm much more knowledgeable thanks to social thinking and what I became aware of around nonverbal communication that I hadn't known about before. With the right help from the right clinicians and somebody who's trained in social thinking, I know they're scattered across the country, some of them are international. In my mind, those are clinicians who I think are well positioned to teach you and help you around building those skills. Because for the better part of my life, I lived without them. And dating in particular was a struggle. And that adversely affected my self-esteem, as you could imagine, not being able to really get past the second, maybe the third date. I'm thinking to myself, what's going on here? The Asperger's diagnosis kind of answered that question. A lot of questions that I couldn't answer before were now able to be answered. And once I had a better idea of where I stood, knowing, granted, it wasn't until I was age 40 of where I stood, then I knew who I could go to help for in terms of addressing the kinds of deficits I knew I had that I wanted to be better at. And I found social thinking, and I became much more knowledgeable about it from them. And there are a couple of concepts around nonverbal communication that, as a result of my work with social thinking, made it into my book. So if you do pick up the book, you'll find that there's some content in there that addresses things like body language, arguably like 85% of what we communicate is not what we say, but how we say it. Those kinds of insights. There's some of that in the book. But social thinking, in terms of the help that's out there that I think could really help in this area, they come to mind before anybody else does. And information about them is on my website under resources.
I have a quick question for you, Sam. Sometimes individuals on the autism spectrum can have a difficult time with obviously understanding the perimeter, understanding people cues. Have you ever practiced those social cues to get a better understanding of what other people might be thinking, or to become aware of what other people are thinking?
It's not so much that I would kind of lock myself in the room and do exercises practicing these things. For me personally, and everybody's different, but for me personally, I found that I could become more knowledgeable about people's cues, verbal, nonverbal, just by getting the right help and by rehearsing in my head what these concepts are. and over time practicing them just by living life. What I found, for example, the lunchroom at work, when you're eating lunch in the lunchroom, there are hidden rules that govern how social interactions should happen in the lunchroom. I had no knowledge about any of these hidden rules. For me, the rules I followed were the rules that were verbally taught to me or that were there posted on the wall in writing, because those are concrete ways of acquiring knowledge that what's abstract, what's hidden, me and a lot of others on the spectrum would struggle with. But having been taught by the right people about these hidden rules, again, social thinking figures into this, that I was able to go into the lunchroom being cognizant of, okay, I'm in the lunchroom, I'm in the ideal space to practice this new knowledge I've acquired from my speech language pathologist. And over time, I started to listen better to what my colleagues were talking about. It occurred to me where it didn't before, to not be shy about jumping into a conversation and contribute relevant comments to those conversations, and to not bury my head in my food, because I would often sit at the table like this, just eat, 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 just kind of be self-absorbed, absorbed in my food to the exclusion of everything else going on around me. That I had a lot to practice, I had a lot to learn, and I had the perfect scenario at work in which to practice these skills. So it's real life practicing in the relevant environments. It's learning what you can from the right clinicians and rehearsing them in your head, because oftentimes, if you write something down about what you've learned, it doesn't do you any good if you forget to look at what you've written down in terms of written reminders. That I often find, and others have found, that the more effective way to learn is that once you learn something, as often as you can, rehearse it repeatedly in your head. And for me, that proved to be the best way that I could learn social skills and have them stick and have them become part of my MO in any number of social situations. And I talk at length about this in the chapter around social competence, in terms of understanding that there are hidden rules, different types of hidden rules under different circumstances, depending upon who you're dealing with. The hidden rules that govern interactions with your parents or with a close friend are going to be very, very different than the hidden rules that govern what you should and should not do in the lunchroom or around the water cooler at work. Understanding that different scenarios carry different hidden rules, nonverbal communication, what sorts of behaviors I did that were not tactful and others that were, a bunch of other social competence type skills that are in that chapter, again, most of which I learned from social thinking, whose mission it is to help with the development of social competencies so that people who have hardships in these areas can learn to build more meaningful, connected lives. Essentially, that's the mission of social thinking, which in many ways I found transformative in my own life, where I would often ask myself the question, gee, growing up, if only I knew then what I know now. But I couldn't have known then what I know now because I really didn't even have a full picture of who I was. There was this unrevealed diagnosis I was living with, without which I could go for help, but it wouldn't necessarily be the right kind of help that I was able to get once diagnosed.
Are there any other questions?
Hello, Sam. First of all, thank you very much for all that knowledge that you shared.
Thank you, Carla.
I'm not as familiar with the diagnosis as many of the people here might be, but I feel like I learned a lot just from this time that we spent together here. And I have to say, these guidelines that you came up with are helping a lot of people, maybe in the spectrum, but also people that are not in the spectrum, because
Correct.
we forget how to look at things concretely and how to put them in a set of rules. And with this social media coming through, we also forget how to deal with face-to-face relationships. So
Yes.
thank you. Thank you very much.
And one of the things I say in my book is that, you know, things like developing social competencies, building self-esteem, rising above bullying, workplace success, marriaging, parenting, these are largely universal challenges that you can have whether you're autistic or not. That it kind of points to the reality that perhaps autistic and non-autistic people have more in common with each other than we might believe.
Yeah, definitely.
At the end of the day, we're all human beings. We have our strengths, we have our weaknesses, the things we're good at, the things we stink at. We all win some, we all lose some in life. And if we could only come to terms, as many seem to have a problem with, that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to lose sometimes, that's perfectly well and good because it's intrinsic to the human experience. It's just part of being human.
Part of learning. It's like
Whether
when they
you're
say,
autistic or not. So you're spot on, Carla, in terms of having made that observation.
well, you're more spot on by writing them down, but thank you.
But you're spot on in terms of having picked up on that. And again, there's a lot more in the book than I would ever have time in one event to talk about. But thankfully, the book has resonated with a good number of people who found it to be very helpful. I'm sure there are people who read the book who maybe found it less than helpful, where maybe their struggles are not the ones that I struggled with and eventually learned to either diminish or conquer. And again, the notion of, I don't expect my book to satisfy everybody. I got a 2 out of 5 star rating from one critic who, in my judgment and in the judgment of my publicist who helped me publicize the book, said, well, we kind of think this critic brought the wrong set of expectations to your book, which all the other critics did manage to bring to the book. She criticized the book by saying that the author, me, borders on self-obsession writing what he did, and that I didn't get the flow, that this was a continuous flowing story of characters who developed. Well, I didn't write this to be my life story. There's memoir content, but I streamline it. I think she kind of missed the intent of the book, which I make clear in the introduction, which is that I want it to be a self-help book, not necessarily a smooth flowing, contiguous story of my life. So you win some, you lose some. We dismissed that review for what it was and say, look, the book is not going to satisfy everybody, but thankfully I hear from a lot of people who say that it does.
Just
And
like
that
life.
means the world to me. Mission accomplished in that regard, where I wrote the book with the hope that it would help people.
And well, about that, I was wondering if you had any experiences through your work life where other people related to you in a way that helped you live with this diagnosis in the workplace. Like people that coworkers that weren't on the spectrum or were on the spectrum, how did they help you, or was this all a self experience that you kind of came out and say, here I am, I have to fit in?
Well, the workplace at Cambridge Computer, which is the name of the IT consultancy that I work with, if you're interested, it's cambridgecomputer.com. But I've lasted 25 years there, by and large, because I worked with people in an environment that really brought out the best things in me and that helped me grow as a person. Early on, I had been criticized by my management for often working in a vacuum. I tried to do everything in a given project myself. I took it all on myself, not really realizing that there were people around me who I could have worked with or teamed up on a project to lead to greater success in terms of selling more projects, having more of an impact for more of our clients. And what I found over time was that I went from working in a vacuum to eventually reaching out to my client, to my coworkers, to learning how to really lean on them for things I knew they were good at that I knew I wasn't good at, to for several years now, not just depending upon the teamwork concept, but insisting on it and championing the team dynamic that today, without the team efforts that I'm a part of, I'm dead in the water. Because today, that's the only way I know how to actually work. I mean, look at that evolution over these years, that because I was part of a work environment that championed teamwork and leveraging people's strengths for success, look at the impact it had on me over the years. It's just very profound to me. You can be autistic and break the not so great habits and develop wonderful habits. We're all capable of that kind of growth. I'm proof of it. Others are proof of it, that there's an evolution of growth and of the gaining of wisdom that I try to share in the book, again, to try to have a positive impact on other people's lives. But that's a prime example of how the people I worked with helped me. They helped me develop, they helped me grow, they made me smarter. They helped to reinforce the work ethic that I learned from a very young age, mostly from my father, of when you do something, you do it right or you don't do it at all, which was wonderful to kind of have that role model. Again, very fortunate I've been that I wish other people on the spectrum could be as lucky as I have been in terms of having had the parents that I had, the educational opportunities that I had. Lucy knows what I'm talking about there. We went to the same high school. We were very fortunate, as she said early on, to have gone there. The college I went to, the job opportunities that I crossed paths with. I've been very, very fortunate. That the best I can do to try to bring some of that good fortune to other people is to share what I've learned through this book. For people who maybe haven't been as fortunate as I have been, that maybe there are aspects of the book that can help some people who want to turn their lives around to actually begin to do that. Is a big crux of why this book exists. Yep.
Well, Sam, you've been a wonderful role model, and your book is a great book. There is some good humor in there where you take a moment to recognize some of the faux pas of life and make a good joke out. I'd like to thank everybody for their time. Respectfully, we've gone over quite a bit, but I thought the conversation and the questions were going quite well. So I wanted to allow you to continue. Before we finish, I would like to thank very much Anne-Marie Orlando and our co-host, University of Florida CARD, for joining us tonight and helping us to get this out to the community so that other people can learn from Sam and all the things that he has accomplished in his life. So I thank everybody very much for coming tonight and for participating. I'm certain that Sam will be happy to answer your questions if you have any more questions for him by, again, visiting his website, samfarmerauthor.com. And if any of you forget that, you could just Google him. He's one of the top ones up there under Sam Farmer. There's a few others along the way. Pick the author, or you could reach out to myself as well, and I'll be happy to get you in touch with Sam. So anybody else has anything to say? Go ahead real fast.
This was great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sam. Your information was very, very helpful and useful.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Thank
And
you.
I did record this evening, so I did forget the beginning. So my introduction is lost. I'll see what video skills I can get to piece something together with giving an introduction again. But thank you everybody for joining in tonight. We really appreciate your support and thanks for listening, Sam.
Thanks everybody. And if you feel inclined, only if you feel inclined, I would be most grateful if you do pick up the book and if you do read it, to submit a review on my Amazon author page. I'd be most grateful for that, but only if you're comfortable doing so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Good night, folks. Take care.